All right, everybody. So welcome back, I think, for a more macro half of the day. We are very happy to have Jesús Fernández-Villaverde talking about the demographic future of humanity. And he has assured me that we will all be terrified after this talk.
Thank you. My favorite professor when I was an undergrad told me once that the reason nobody likes economists is because we are like the very annoying kid that told you second grade that Santa Claus doesn't exist. So yes, so this is not really a paper so far, although I have been invited by the annual reviews of economics to write it up as a paper. Also, I'm actually thinking, I have been offered a contract to write it with Nessie Gunner, and this may be a little bit of the outline of what we want to say in the book. It's only 50 minutes. I will kind of summarize a lot of the main ideas and go relatively fast over the others. Also, given that Martha, Pauline, and Tom already touched on many of these issues, I will try to avoid repetition as much as possible. So the starting point is that I want to document 3 facts. The fact number 1 is that the drop in global fertility rate is faster than you think it is. And this is considering that you already thought that total fertility rate is dropping. And this is because of 2 reasons. First, because there has been an acceleration after 2016. I'm going to show you some data to try to conclude. Okay, so total fertility rate was falling. After 2016, seems to be falling faster. The second thing is that I have come to the conclusion that the United Nations World Population Prospect data is very seriously flawed, and that a lot of the conclusions that we are getting in a lot of empirical work are actually wrong. And in fact, I have a different project with Patrick Norrick where we are trying to document that as exhaustively as possible. That means that 2023 was likely the first year in human history when fertility rate fell below replacement rate. Okay? And to me, that's quite striking. It has never happened before, not even during wars on pandemics. Of course, Martha already this morning highlighted that one wants to keep always in mind the difference between DFR and completed fertility. This is data from Sweden, just to have a different example than the US. You can see that total fertility, completed fertility rate has been much more stable than DFR. Now, I think that Sweden is going to look a little bit more like this right now in the future. So instead of being around 1.9, it's going to be maybe around 1.8, 1.7. So I have been doing a few calculations of how much the difference between completed fertility and DFR can be. And we are going to be talking about differences of 0.3, 0.4, which I think fits nicely with your story. And that changes things a little bit, but you will see in a second that for the big picture that I'm going to give you, one talking about 0.3 up and down is not really going to change much of what I want to say. The third point that I want to show is that I have evidence that middle and poor income countries are experiencing faster demographic transitions. Pauline mentioned that in my paper with Matt Deventhal and Nessie Gunner early this morning, but I'm also going to try to convince you that I'm getting more and more convinced that what is going to happen is that those demographic transitions are going to overshoot rich economies, in the sense that fertility is going to drop below anything that we ever saw in advanced economies. And that, I think, I have been thinking about models that will deliver that fact. Now, this is going to have 3 very clear consequences. So peak birth was around 2012. So by peak birth, I mean the year in the history of humanity where more children were born. And that was probably 2012. Now, the United Nations says it's 2014. We don't have that, for 2 years up and down. I'm not going to pick up a fight. The United Nations think that the total number of births in the planet is going to recover, even if the birth rate is going to go down, just because the cohorts are going to be larger. I don't think that is going to happen. I think that peak birth is behind us for the rest of times. And that basically means that given that TFR is already below replacement rate, the world population will probably start falling around 2055. This will depend on something that is called momentum. So momentum in demographics, many of you probably know it, is that population can still grow because past cohorts were very large, even if we are below replacement rate. How long momentum lasts depends a little bit on how fast the demographic transition is being, but it usually takes between 15 to 30 years. And that's why, just going a little bit up in that range, I think that the planet as a whole will start losing population in 2055. And this is going to be the more macro part of the talk. I'm going to try to tell you that thinking about how the world economy will look like at that time, we already have an experience, which is Japan. Okay, and I have worked a lot on Japan, and I have tried to argue, I think, to my opinion, in a convincing way, that the present of Japan is really going to be how a lot of the planet is going to look like in 30 years.
Yeah, feel free
Sure.
to defer this if you're going to get to this,
Sure.
but why Japan?
Because Japan was of the advanced economies, the first one that had a very, very big drop in fertility. So of all the rich economies, the first one that fell below 2.1 was Japan in the late 1960s. And if you want, I can tell you a little bit later,
Yeah.
but this is basically, the way I think about it is the fertility rate is going to have issues that are determined by like the standard quantity quality trade-off, but then you're going to have also idiosyncratic characteristics. I think there is a very big idiosyncratic East Asia that lowest fertility with respect to everything else. And that's why Japan was the first country that started this demographic. And you will see in a second, it's actually quite interesting. Okay, so if you're a demographer, you already know this, so I apologize for it. But I have discovered that most economists don't know this. So I need to educate you guys. The global replacement rate is not 2.1. You pick up the New York Times, you pick the economists, they always say replacement rate is 2.1. That's only true-ish. What do I mean by that? The replacement rate, this is an approximation. There is a more complicated formula that gives you the exact expression, but it doesn't really matter, is 1 plus the sex ratio at birth divided by the probability of a woman to survive to the age of 30. In the exact formula, you really have the integral about probabilities of survival during your whole life cycle. Now, what is the intuition for that? Is the sex ratio is just the number of boys being born per girl. This tells you that this is the number of girls you are going to have born in a population, and this is how many of these girls are going to move on to have girls themselves. Okay, so for an advanced country like the US, yes, it's 2.1. Why? Because it's 1, sex ratio at birth is 1.05, that's the natural sex ratio at birth if you don't have any type of outside intervention, and the probability of a woman to reach the age of 30 is around 98%. Okay, a few people die young, a few car accidents, stuff like that. And that gives you 2.1. Well, it turns out to be the case, this is not what happens for the planet. The first point that is different from the planet is that the sex ratio at birth is very skewed in many countries due, and I'm missing one slide, sorry, I apologize for that, due to selective abortions. So in countries like India or China, is 1.15. Okay, big differences. The second reason why this is quite different is because the survival probability is much lower. So you take Pakistan, the sex ratio at birth is 10%, 1.10. The survival probability is 0.90. That means that the replacement rate for Pakistan is 2.33, is not 2.1. So what I have done is using the best statistical data that I have access to, and I understand there is going to be some uncertainty over there, so I want to be very open and honest about it. But at this moment, there is around 8% more men born than women, and the average survival probability is 95. And this is very skewed by the fact that a lot of the young women are being born right now in Africa. And that gives you that the replacement rate for the planet is 2.2. Okay, so this is important to keep in mind. Replacement rate for the planet, 2.2, not 2.1. By the way, this is in any standard demographics textbook, okay? This was in my undergraduate. I took undergraduate demographics. This was in my undergraduate textbook. So no claim to originality whatsoever. Okay, so once we have done this type of cleanup work to begin with, let's go to fact 1, the drop in global TFR. I told you before, I'm going to try to convince you that the United Nations data is funky, but at this moment, let's take it at face value. And this is the TFR computed by the United Nations in each of the different releases of its population prospects from 2012 to 2024. And basically what you see is that, yes, the world was having around 5 kids per woman in the 1950s and 1960s. And then you see this very, very, very fast drop, but it kind of slows down. Okay? And if we go back in time and you look, I have been teaching this stuff to undergrads since 2001. So if you go back to my undergraduate class in 2008, I will have said, yeah, that's kind of what we expect. And as the United Nations, we're saying we are going to continue gently, think about this as a gliding path towards, in some moment below 2 by the year 2100. But you can see already a little bit what is happening over here. Okay, so this is just the zoom of the same thing, and you can see how around here it starts dropping down a lot. And you see how in each new release of the World Population Prospects, they are lowering fertility. Actually, quite substantially, you will see in a second. I have a slide to show you about that. So this is what I was telling you. Misquoting Virginia Woolf on about 2016, human nature change, or more concretely, fertility behavior of the planet. Now I'm going to tell you I don't believe the United Nations data. Okay? In fact, I'm going to make this point in 4 different ways. The first one is that there are very, very large discrepancies between vital registries and the United Nations data. So what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to go, and I'm not going to be looking at crazy countries. Okay? I'm going to be looking at Denmark. I'm going to be looking at Sweden. I'm going to be looking at Germany. Countries that have incredibly accurate statistics. And I go to Denmark, and I say, how many kids were born in Denmark in 2023? And they are going to say, this many. And then I look at the United Nations, and they tell me, this many more. If it just happened from Denmark, that's okay. It happens for around 70% of the countries.
Can you talk about which sources you're using for both?
I'm just the National Statistical Agency of each country.
I see. It's
Okay.
not the Human Fertility Database.
No,
Okay.
this is just, I basically sit down with a couple of my postdocs and we go, Danish National Institute of Statistics, and they have a time series of births.
Yeah.
And I compare with the time series of births of the United Nations. They just don't agree with each other.
What is the United Nations using? They're
Yes.
using a statistical projection based on.
Let me show you one example and I show you to you. Yes, Andy.
I was going to say, usually the agencies just report.
That's the funny thing. Okay, so let me give you one concrete example, Colombia. Okay, so why Colombia? First of all, the United Nations assess Colombian data as being complete and accurate. Second, my postdoc is Colombian. 3, we were able, because he's Colombian, to call people at DANE, the National Institute of Statistics in Colombia, and we sit for them for 6 hours. Okay, and we ask, okay, this is the number of births you reported in 2023. This is the number of births you reported in 2024. A little bit less than 450. The United Nations is reporting over 700. Okay, we are talking about here discrepancies of 200 something. Why? And they say, we don't know. And I say, are you sure about these numbers? And they told me, maybe we're missing some kid in the middle of the Amazonia? Perhaps. But we are here. Okay? Colombia is actually a very serious country with very good statisticians. This doesn't make any sense. Okay? Now, it's just Colombia. Well, since Cello was going to be in the seminar, I said, let's do a Cello statistic. Again, big difference between what the United Nations reports and what the Turkish National Statistic reported. And now I talk with some guy who is at Birkbeck College in, I don't remember his last name. And again, I asked him, should I trust Turkish National Statistics? And he said, yes, we are serious about it. And again, you can talk about 5,000 up and down. Egypt, huge differences. Maybe Egypt, I trust a little bit less, but the United Nations assess Egypt as a country with very good statistics. And very good, they have kind of classified countries in 3 levels of how complete their vital statistics are, and Egypt is in the first. Yes. Adrian.
Wait, where are you just showing the 23-24 vital statistics points? Like.
Oh,
it's like-
no, I mean, just to make the point, but
Okay.
this will be,
It's.
but the difference is becoming larger. The difference is becoming larger. Now, I don't want to push this argument too much, but we already, for many of these countries, we already have data up to September. Some countries actually report data monthly. We keep going down by a lot.
Do you compare data on deaths also?
Yes, I don't have it in this presentation I took out. They don't match either. And they don't match migration either.
But somehow overall they cancel each other out?
Oh, this is wonderful. Let me skip a little bit ahead. According to the United Nations data, there is net migration into Earth. So we really need that wall to stop all these Martians crossing illegally.
But it's small, no? It's like.
No, it's not a lot, but the fact that they cannot even get this number right.
You're counting identity, yeah.
Yeah, okay?
So both agencies should probably report TFR, so this is.
Yes, I'm going to go,
Not-
yes, and the PFRs are not even close.
Okay.
Not even close. I'm going to go back to that in a second.
I want to go a little more on the fact that, I mean, you're showing us the vital statistics data points right at the edge.
Yeah.
Between
Yes.
what the UN says happened and what the UN says will happen, and the will happen part, I think nobody really trusts.
Okay.
So.
So this is just to make the point easily. I actually have a GitHub repo that is open to the public with all the data, and you can make the graph with all these things going back to the 1950. And they have been underreporting births for quite a bit for the last 10, 15 years.
For some of these countries going back 10, 15
No,
years.
the problem is when you go 50 years, it starts to be imaginary data. That I give you the point, but
In the vital statistics. Huh?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
okay. But I'm
It's just
saying
that, like,
this
I'm
was
comparing
just,
it-
yeah,
In 23 and 24, and certainly in the recent monthly data.
Yeah.
A lot of those
Okay.
birth records will continue to flow in.
I look at 2016 and you still see huge differences. Okay? So this is just to make the point.
As different in more developed economies?
In quite a big developed economies, there is,
US, for example.
yeah, no, it's not that big, but it's a good 5% difference, even going backward a bit of time. Now, there is one country and one country only that the United Nations fully agrees with the National Statistics Agency.
Which one?
No,
Spain.
no, of course not. I mean, who's going to trust us anyway? China. A country where we actually have very good reasons not to believe their National Statistical Agency. That's the only one the United Nations fully trust. Yes.
So there's many other organizations besides the
Yeah.
United Nations that makes projections,
Mhm.
like the Wittgenstein Center, and they're all projecting
Okay,
lines
so-
in 2085. So are they all collected?
Okay, so for instance, the group in Washington that has been doing these things, I'm going to tell you is 2055. I think their forecast is 2056.
But the Wittgenstein Center, they're also very credible, and they've been doing this for, 20.
That I don't know from the top of my head. I will need to
Okay,
double check.
because there's a lot of agencies,
Yes.
not just the
Yeah.
UN, that they're all kind of projecting
Yeah.
very similar things.
Yeah, yeah.
And they
But-
kind of have small differences.
Yeah, no, but
So-
remember the point I'm making now is that the numbers they say they were, these are actually recorded numbers. These are not forecasts. The forecasts are in this continuous line. Now, 2024 is true, it's a forecast, but I could do this. I have versions of this graph going back years before. Okay, so they are not reporting the numbers right. Now, this is the point you are making. The United Nations is making forecasts that do not seem that credible to me. India going down, going down, going down, going down, going down, and then right when we stop, it stabilizes. The same for the US, going down, going down, going down, although you will agree with that, stabilizes. Well, it actually goes up a little bit. China goes down and then it starts going up. But my favorite one is this one, is South Korea. Okay, I was joking before, I used to teach MBAs. If I show this to an MBA, they are not going to believe it. Now, there is a little bit of a reason why they are forecasting this from a statistical perspective. And the second one is the type of justification they do. So basically, and this actually took us a little bit of time to really understand their methodology. They have what they call a hierarchical Bayesian model that has a very strong reversion to the mean. Now, you can say, I don't really know anything about the future. That kind of may make sense. Okay, that's fine with me, but at least be open about it. Okay, so I'm not giving them a hard time for having a model that has regression to the mean. I'm giving them a hard time because they don't say, since we don't know anything about the future, we are going to revert to the mean. They say the rebound in future fertility for low fertility countries is consistent with an expectation of continued progress towards gender equality and women's empowerment and improving social and economic opportunities for young people and families. That doesn't seem to me a very sound econometric justification.
So they do reversion to the mean, but they don't have a model of the evolution of that mean.
No. It's just basically a model. It's like an AI. They basically have this model that
They
reverts
look
to
at
the
the
mean.
fact to think about what the mean is.
No. Okay. And again, I have worked for the IMF and we have done forecasts over there. And sometimes you need to make a forecast and you say, I don't know what the future is going to be, but at least let me be open about what I do. Let me not bury this in Appendix 28B, where no one is going to see it. Now, you can tell that this is already having very, very big consequences. Look, 2015, the United Nations forecast until the year 2100, and they were saying in the year 2100, the world population is still going to be growing. And at that time, we are going to be 11.2 billion people. In 2017, yes, we are going to still be growing, and we took out, 40 million. That's not a big deal. 30 million. That's not a big deal. 2019, they take out 200 plus. 2022, now they peak at 286. Okay? And look, they reduce all the way to 10.4. And by the year 2024, in the latest release, they lower all the way to 10.18, and now the peak is in 2084. But remember, that peak in 2084 implies this, and implies this for China, and implies this for India, which are, South Korea is not that important quantitatively, but China and India are. So what the United Nations needs to get you that we will peak in 2084 is a stabilization of TFR in India and a big rebound in China. Yes.
At some point, maybe it was before 2015,
Mhm.
the UN switched to this new Bayesian hierarchical model.
Yes.
Do you know when that happened?
Yes, I think it happened in some moment around here. I don't remember from the top of my head. Because before,
build is a big change and a big
yes,
improvement.
yes, but it's still the case that model, that hierarchical model, has still a very strong relation to the mean. It's less bad than the previous one. The previous one will always go back to 2.1. This one does not go, but it wants to go back to basically the regional TFR observed right now. Okay? Now, even if I had a little bit more time, I could even tell you why they only dropped this by 100 something people. They basically, what they did was they have absolutely crazy upward revision on how many people is going to live in Egypt and Yemen. Otherwise, they will have already dropped below 10 billion. Okay, but even taking the forecast at face value, look, in just 9 years, they have taken out 1 billion people from their forecast. And that's a lot. And it's really a lot because remember, the total population is a stock variable. So taking 1 billion out of a stock variable implies huge changes in flows. Okay. So what do? What I do is the following. I'm going to be extremely conservative. And I'm just going to look at countries where I have reasons to believe that the United Nations is not getting the data right. Colombia, Denmark, Sweden. For all those countries that I don't fully trust their national statistical agency, I'm going to still keep the United Nations data. So Nigeria is still the United Nations data. Okay, so I'm just substituting what I think are really bad observations for better observations. When I do that, I get that the TFR is already 2.17. The United Nations thinks it's like 2.25. So this is not a gigantic revision. I'm not telling you, oh, I have completely changed your view of the world. I'm changing only the second decimal. But because the replacement rate was not 2.1, but 2.2, as I'm changing, like any good person in finance, you change both the numerator and the denominator. That's why we are below the replacement rate. Okay? And, well, anyway, We can change this slightly, but I think we will get out basically the same result all the time. And that's what we are going to get 2025, 2055. And I will not be surprised if it's even earlier than that. Now, is this something completely out of any type of sensible forecast? It's actually right what the world population prospect low fertility scenario is. And I think that's going to be the most likely scenario.
So how should we think about this in light of what Martha was saying about people delaying stuff? Like, does that mean that there could be a rebound and actually peak birth is coming because there's a lot of people delaying, or is that involved?
So I don't think, so I think Martha has a great point for the US. I think that the enormous drops in fertility that we are seeing in countries I'm going to show you in this moment, even if there is some delay and the final completed fertility is going to be different, there is just not enough room to make up for that. Yes.
And for Africa, they usually revise upwards.
Okay.
I know why the model doesn't have this regression to the mean that.
Because remember, for Africa, what happens is that they mean it below the current level, and that's why it continues going down for them. Now, this is a little bit more speculative, and I was going to say that in just 1 second. I actually think that the United Nations is already hugely overestimating the number of births in Africa by a tremendous amount of numbers, especially in East Africa. I think that countries like Kenya has already really crossed a threshold. Kenya just has a relatively good fertility survey data. Nairobi, according to the latest release, the metropolitan area of Nairobi is already below replacement rate.
So based on which data?
It's based on survey, like a household survey data.
The DHS.
Yeah. My belief, and I give you.
The survey, or you believe that what they're reporting, just.
No, I believe in the survey of the Kenyans. Okay? And I think that we are probably already seeing a very fast drop in fertility in Africa. And the problem is basically what the United Nations does in practice. When the United Nations tells you there were 9 million births in Nigeria last year, what they did is they have treated a model that there were going to be 9 million births in Nigeria, and they are telling you there were 9 million births in Nigeria, or forecast was correct. Okay, it's completely made up data. And I think that the day we actually go and properly measure how many births happened in Nigeria in 2023, that's my belief. I can be wrong. I want to be very honest about this, okay? Was not 9 millions, it was probably closer to 8, or even below 8. Yes.
So has anybody done this exercise of taking the DHSs and just because, I mean, we have DHSs for like,
Yeah.
do something
I know.
just comparing like the.
After giving this talk in several places, several people have told me, is this a good project? And I say, yes. I just have the fact. Yes, sir. More than happy. If you get me 5 postdocs to work on this, I'm more than happy to do it. I just don't have because this is a very time intensive. Okay. So let me tell you also then fact number 3, which is faster and deeper demographic transitions. With respect to the fact that they are faster, Pauline very kindly already cited my paper with Matt and Nessie, where we kind of document that. With respect to deeper, this is what I think, and again, this is a little bit of a conjecture, what I think is going to happen with the world. You are going to have the advanced economies. I started at 5. They are going to drop, and then they kind of stay over there. So your point, Martha, that there is not a lot of evidence of a second demographic transition for the US, I agree with you.
Actually, I was making another
Yeah,
point,
okay.
but
No, that's
talk
fine.
about that later.
Yeah, okay.
But then it's not super low, is I
Yeah,
think the point.
exactly. Second point, or that there is a moderate secondish transition. This is what I think is going to happen with middle income economies. They are going to drop faster and stabilize at a lower level, and that the very poor economies are going to stabilize at a much lower level even.
Sorry, I missed something. Is this like just intuition, or this comes out of a model?
No, this is intuition. I can write a model that gives you that. I'm sufficiently good to write a model. I'm just going to show you very preliminary evidence that this is what I think. That this slope is bigger, that we have documented. The final point that I will only be able to document in 2060. Okay, but what we conjecture, so I promise in 1 second. What I conjecture is that it may well be the case by the year 2050, we think about the US as the high fertility country in the world. Yes.
Very basic question. What is a low income versus a middle income?
Oh, just divide the countries like in the top
Okay. These are
quartile, middle, like top, second and third quartile and fourth quartile. This is just stylized.
Okay.
This is a Minnesota stylized fact.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. In the world, you could write what creates differences in the total TFR.
The final one.
The final one.
Yes. So in the paper with Matt and Nessie, this is basically a model where you have ideas, diffusion of ideas. And that's how we get that. Now, is the whole story? I don't think so. I think there's also social norms and stuff like that, but you can deliver. Eh?
Okay, so I need how to go from ID to fertility.
Okay, so this is basically a model, it's a quantity quality trade-off, Barrow-Becker, and ideas and technological change is a skill bias. So the more ideas are diffused, the more you want to invest in human capital, the more you move in the quality quantity trade-off. And what we assume is that the industrial revolution starts in the UK and spreads around the world. The model has a twist, which is also.
So the option value of gave birth to Steve Jobs, that's what makes us want to.
Yeah.
Have more kids in the US.
So.
So would it make a difference that they don't all start at 5?
No, this is just an stylized spot. It may be the case that these countries start at 5. This is just an stylized hypothesis. I want to emphasize, this is a hypothesis, okay?
But so the ones that fall faster end up lower.
Yes, I'm going to show you data about that in just 1 second, preliminary data.
And then, but sorry, the intuition for that is what?
Now, the intuition is in this model, if you're a country that has the development late, you kind of overshoot in the quality-quantity trade-off. Okay, because it's a model that doesn't have, like everyone does not converge at the very same level at the end. You are always, this is a model where the United States will always be a little bit ahead of followers. Yes.
So I wasted time on viral models. And there are 2 steady states.
Yes.
An endemic steady state and there's extinction.
Yes.
And
Yeah, this leads to extinction.
oh, not that.
No, below. Remember, 2 is here.
Okay, so what's
It's just that the poor people are going to go extinct faster than the rich.
why are we headed to one steady state versus the other?
That's what I was trying to say, because in this model of technology, well, first of all, you can think about this
No,
as.
no, you're gonna give me a model. I'm
No.
just talking about if I went to species, so I asked the evolutionary biologist and I said, every species chooses like a different reproduction strategy. Do we?
No, because this is going to be mediated by your relative prices in each country, and the relative prices are going to depend on your information.
Tell Salmon about relative prices. What I mean, have we seen species that just pick the wrong reproduction strategy? and
Yes.
Extinct?
Yes,
Is that normal?
yeah, the pandas, the mammoths, plenty of them. That's why they are not around. Okay. Yes.
It's a really point.
Yeah.
Should I think as a reasonable strategy, both for a statistical model
Mhm.
and for a microphonic model, to have some force towards,
2.1.
no, a force. towards-
Why? But that's the point I'm trying to make. Why should we build models where 2.1 is the long run steady state? There's no particular reason.
Well, because like we can't go to infinity.
Yes, and we can go to 0.
And they can, I mean.
You are just
here-
having an unreasonable belief in the existence of a steady state.
Well, there is one, extinction.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. It's asymptotic. No, but more seriously, no, Andy. Exactly.
But we're fighting against extinction, that's.
No, in the long run, a lot of stuff. In the long run, we are going to have changes in relative compositions of the population. Someone mentioned before the levels of religiosity, cultural differences. You know, the Amish, they are still having a lot of kids. So what may happen is in the year 2400, everyone is Amish. And that will completely change. And we see that very clearly. Different levels of religiosity leads to different levels of fertility. But what I'm going to try to make a much simpler point, which is we are seeing that when countries enter into this demographic transition, they seem to be falling below what other countries have done before. It's a much humbler point.
But Jesus, so I'm just when I look at this picture, and again, I think about Martha's talk, I feel like, well, maybe in these developing countries, this delay effect is just way stronger.
Okay, let me show you this table. So what I have done is I have gone to national statistical agencies, and this is the number each national statistical agency reports. And I have on purpose picked countries that satisfy 2 characteristics. 1, they are much poorer than the US, and 2, have lower total fertility rate than the US. The US was 1.62, Dominican Republic 1.61, Tunisia 156, Mexico 155, Turkey 148, Brazil, Iran, Sri Lanka, Jamaica, Costa Rica, Colombia, Chile, Thailand. So yes, maybe realized fertility in Thailand ends up being 1.3. There is just not enough room. When you see already how many kids people have had in Thailand by the mid-30s, they don't have that much time left to make it up that much.
Right, they mentioned a big difference, though. in
For
terms
the
of,
world,
like,
yes. No, that's true.
1.9 and 1.6.
No, it makes a big difference. And for policy, it does make a big difference. What I'm trying to say is at the level of Chile of 1.03, and what we have seen people already, women in Chile already 35 years old, yes, maybe they may end up in 1.3. They are never going to end up in 1.9 like in the United States. And this is what amazes me. How in the world, pretty much by now, nearly all of the Americas have lower TFR than the United States. Very few countries left in the Americas. Look, do the following thing. Go out in campus, here we are in LA, so a lot of people care about Mexico. Go through campus and ask, how many of you knew that the TFR of the United States in 2024 was higher than Mexico? How many of you knew that the TFR of non-Hispanic Americans in the US, which was 158 if I remember, is higher than the TFR of Mexico?
Because you said you just pick those countries, whatever the look.
Until I ran out of space, until I ran out of space on the table. I didn't want to write a Tom Sargent table. Okay?
No, but just because it's sort of, you said it, yeah.
I know, no, but
We want to know what the other countries are.
tell me, but ask me which country are you interested in Latin America, and I can tell you the TFR right now.
Do like some, right?
No, but Tom is looking at census data, which is, I don't have anything against this.
I'm just saying in terms of presentation, because here it's like, I just guess to see the numbers.
But the other question too is like, there's some, to some extent, these are going to reflect some delay. Because you're getting very low rates at young ages, right? And then there's going to be catch up, but all of those cohorts at the moment during the delay do not.
Yes,
so
but
this is probably lower than the steady state.
yes, it may be lower than the steady state, but the point I'm trying to make is even if you correct Chile and you think that they are going to end up at 1.3, Chile is going to have more deaths than births probably next year or the year after that. Uruguay already has more deaths than births. Jamaica already has more deaths than births. Barbados has more deaths than births. Other countries in the Americas that are in that situation.
And just let me say, that just seems like the wrong comparison to me, because we're not, I mean, just the number of deaths at a point in time versus the number of births, like the long run population reflects whether or not people are hitting.
No, I understand, but again, Martha, take this one.
I don't mean that, I mean, it's gonna adjust things fundamentally. I just mean, I would
I know.
remember this a little bit, right?
Fine, that's fair enough. But these numbers to me are essential. And I don't see in addition to it, if you look at them year by year, they keep going down, they keep going down, they keep going down. So this is not necessarily the end of Thailand before they start recovering. Okay.
Do you have the cohort tables? Or
Yeah.
you're just looking at point in time data? So
Yeah.
So in the GitHub, we have in the web page, we have everything. We have all the data for all the countries and I'm just.
You can do the cohort table.
There, put together the cohorts.
The cohort, yes, but we can do year by year.
Census stops asking, if there's one thing we could do leading up to the next census, it would be ask every country to ask this retrospective question that I'm using. That's now not available in the US.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you meant the TFR and the births year by year.
No, I get that you can get the right time.
It's a really important thing to have.
But let me just tell you, over the last 11 minutes, you are supposed to be paying my ticket because I'm a macro guy. So let me tell you something about the macro. But you say at the beginning, see a macro presentation, so I need to deliver. Okay. Now, of course, there are going to be good news. Every time I give this paper, I always get this type of question. So I want to be very upfront about it. With a lower population growth, you are going to be able to do a lot of good things. No, you are going to be able to handle infrastructure. You are going to be able to handle housing. You are going to be able to transition to net zero much more easily. And this is one of my favorite photographs. I always use this when I teach economic history of Latin America. This is one of the very first photographs I show them this is in Brazil, and I said, look, this is what wealth inequality is. That's in Lima. Okay.
No, it looks just like.
Oh, okay. But this is what income inequality means. Nice condos with like a jacuzzi in each condo and a nice swimming pool. You just cross the wall and it looks different. Okay. And part of the reason Lima looks so awful is because the 1960s and 1970s Peruvian population grew so fast that it was very difficult to handle that growth of population in terms of providing infrastructures. But this is a very simple calculation that I do in a paper that I published with Gustavo Ventura at Arizona State and Wen Yao, one of my former students now at Tsinghua. And I'm kind of simplifying, but hopefully you get the point of what I want to say. Think about the basic accounting identity. Output is equal to labor productivity times labor. So you take derivatives with respect to logs and derivatives with respect to time. You have that output growth is labor productivity growth plus labor growth. So the way we were, think about the US circa 2000, labor productivity growth was around 2% a year on average. 1.9 is kind of the canonical number that Lee taught me when I was a graduate student. And labor growth was around 1%. 50% of it was because the US still had relatively high fertility. The other 50% is because you guys let in people with funny accents like me. And that gave you an output growth on average of around 3%. Some years you do a little bit better, some years you do a little bit worse, but 3 is the quote unquote normal. Think about a world where labor growth is going to fall 1% a year, just because of the aging of the population and low fertility. Imagine that labor productivity growth is still 2%, which I think is a tall order and it's not going to happen, but just for the sake of the argument. That means that on average, you are going to grow 1%. And that's the new normal. And there is absolutely nothing whatsoever that either monetary or fiscal policy can do about it.
Or should do it.
Or should do about it, even. No? There is nothing you can do about it. This is not the central bank that anything can do about it. So what we argue is the following in the paper. Japan is the poster kid of bad economic performance. You go, this is just a famous book by Pesek. This is the type of books on economics you find in an airport bookstore. But there are dozens and dozens of papers published in top fives from very respected and well-known economists that I will not name here. Say, no, the problem of Japan is that they didn't do the right restructuring of the banks. The problem of Japan is that they didn't do the right monetary policy. If we just had stabilized the interest rate. Okay, so we do the following. We look at the data between 1991 and 2019. Martha, you asked me before, why Japan? Because Japan started having the big drop in fertility around 1970. 1969, 1970, it was the first major advanced economy that dropped below 2.1. That's going to start being felt 20 years later, 22 years later, when these people start entering or not entering into the labor force. So before 1991, you cannot really tell the difference between different countries. But let's look at 1991 to 2019. We stopped in 2019 because we didn't want this to be contaminated by the years of COVID. But if I can do up to 2024, I get exactly the same answer. And you see, GDP, Canada, well, let me skip. Who cares about Canada? US, 258. Great, the US is doing great. You pick up the Wall Street Journal. The US is such a dynamic, fantastic, wonderful economy. Japan, 0.83. They are doing everything wrong in Japan. They should know better. They need to hire Ricardo Caballero and tell them how to run monetary policy. Well, think about the fact that population growth in the US, labor growth was still high. How can we measure it? Think, for instance, about working age adults. And I know that you're going to ask me about older Japanese working. I come back to that in a second. Was 0.91. In Japan, it was minus 0.54.
I was also going to ask you about women who were
Yes.
much less in Japan.
Yes, and that's why I'm going to tell you about total hours work. Total hours work minus 43, 1.04. It actually makes the case even more in my favor. So I was giving you the cautious evaluation. What do you get? That when you actually look, and by the way, working age adults, we do it 15 to 64. We also do it 15 to 69 because a lot of old people work in Japan. But remember, this is a level. they already work a lot in 1991. There are not that many people working more than 70. We also did to 74. We also took out to 22 to kind of people go to college, not to count them. Doesn't matter how you do it. And we also did it total hours work. Okay, so we did a lot of things. I'm not really, this is better than this. The point is all of them give you the same answer. Once you control for population, the US, let's say this line over here is 158 versus 121. Japan and the US are not that different. Now, if I wanted to push my argument a little bit more, I can take out 1991 to 1995, which are the years of the burst of the bubble and the recovery of the bubble. Between 1995 to 1996 to today, Japan growth per hour or per worker has been higher than the US. So Japan is doing as well as you can do when there are fewer Japanese. That's it. The only way Japan could be growing at the level of the US is this TFP will be growing at 3% a year. And that's never going to happen for an advanced economy.
But why is this bad?
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that all those papers in American Economic Review about the problems of Japan do not make any sense. It's a very different statement. It's not bad for me, it's bad. I very carefully didn't pick up the Europe political economy. All the papers over there are great. Yes.
For things like GDP per capita.
Yes, okay.
But for R minus G.
Okay, so this is the less cheeky answer to one. Do we care about GDP per capita? Yes and no. So yes, output per capita is the primary measure of individual welfare. But one, our ability to service debt and social security obligations depend on total output. When I participate a lot of the policy debate in Europe, and people tell me, oh, but we are still going to be growing, so can we pay pensions? You know, just speaking a couple of phrases. Since you seem guys seem not to find any prime minister who can tackle this issue. But the problem is you need to tax someone to pay for those pensions. That's not straightforward. Output per capita is not just a pie that I can cut in many pieces and redistribute without any distortion or any cost. But also we have debt, we have national defense. Okay, so right now the whole European countries need to pay for much more national defense, like it or not. And how are we going to pay for that with a shrinking population? Okay, and then what I can wrap up is, do I still believe, remember, all this started with 2%. Hugo is not here, but Hugo has this wonderful paper that I love and that I always cite, saying, no, firm dynamism and new technologies is going to depend a lot on new people being around in the economy. It's hard to believe that with very small young cohorts, we are still going to be able to grow at a 2%. Or that with very aged societies, people is not going to adapt new technologies at the same speed as before. Now, is this the end of the world? No, but it means that things are going to be very difficult. And they're going to be very difficult for many countries. Just 1 second. How is Mexico or Colombia or Argentina going to be able to handle a lot of the social security and other obligations they have committed themselves with shrinking populations? That's going to be a very difficult situation. And at this moment, everything I see in the data is that all these countries are going to have hugely shrinking populations. In addition to it, a lot of these countries still are net senders of migrants to the rest of the world, which even makes this a little bit more.
No, it's just, I mean, it's possible labor productivity will grow with AI and stuff like that. And I mean, in the past, people make these predictions and kind of always.
No, I know.
So we have robots and they'll help us make innovations. The AI will help.
So I have this disclaimer that I kind of went quickly. There is a non-trivial risk that someone make fun of me in 25 years. I'm fully aware of it. Now, the speaker right next to me. My counter argument is, do I think the US is an economy that is going to adapt artificial intelligence and take a lot of advantages out of this? Yes. Do I think that the Spanish economy is going to be able to do that? No, we are going to hyper-regulate everything. It's going to be impossible. Have you tried to use a lot of Apple products in Europe? They just don't work. They don't work because of the Data Protection European Act. So yes, we are going to have fantastic regulations, fantastic artificial intelligence. It's just that you cannot run them, so you don't get them.
No, but Jesus, you showed us a table that showed hours for, output
Yeah.
per hour work grew at similar rates.
Yeah.
You did single out Spain and Italy as underperforming,
Mhm.
but there was a tendency to say like this technology seems to be flowing around the world. And
Mhm.
fuck it up.
Yeah, no. So the point over here, think about this as a measure of labor productivity. Yes. So you basically have the US growing at a 1.
And Spain and Italy screwing it up.
Yeah, well, so the US does great, and then you have the UK, Canada, France, and Germany. You lose 0.3, which, after a few decades ends up to something. And then, of course, you have Spain, and of course, well, actually, we do even worse here, Italy and Spain. Okay. So, but even that, even if I were Canada, you are losing 0.3 a year. And that's not a trivial thing. It's over 10 years, it's 3%. Over a few decades, it's a non-trivial amount of difference. So it's not that this story doesn't tell you all the countries need to grow at the same speed, but it's basically telling you that once your population growth is over here, how in the world are you going to even get close to this in any way?